Here we go. No. All right. Just want to make sure. Let's moving some screens around here. So got some funkiness going on. Can everybody see my slides?
Yep. Yes.
Cool. Thank you. All right, let me just get adjusted. I shared my screen and it moved all my Zoom stuff around. I'm like, wait, what's happening? Okay. All right, here we go. So thank you, everyone, for joining me tonight. I hope everybody's doing well. And I want you to know that my talk is a little bit interactive tonight. So what I want you to do is go to the bottom of the screen and see the reactions tab and give me a thumbs up to show me that you can give me a thumbs up. There's going to be a few points that I'm going to be asking you some stuff. So I see that most people are giving thumbs up. Great. Awesome. That's great. So also, if you're not on mute, please do so. And then we'll chit chat later. Okay. So today we're going to talk about cognitive biases and how to keep them from creeping into your work. And so since we're pretty tight on time, let's go ahead and get started. First, I want to start off by looking at some images. And I want you to think about what you see in these images. Just take a minute and think about what you see here. How about this one? What do you see here? And this one. Oop, I skipped one. What do you see there? What's going on in that picture? I'm guessing that you saw a couple of different things in these images, huh? And so what's going on here? Well, our mind tries to make us feel comfortable in the world around it as quickly as possible. Simply put, our mind plays tricks on us. And sometimes our brain jumps to conclusions really quickly. And sometimes when it does that, it makes stuff up that's just wrong. So when we see a couple of things in an image, like here, maybe you see an upside down bathtub, but maybe you also see an animal-like figure with its legs in the air. This is known as the pareidolia effect. And for some of the bigger words, I'm going to say them twice. This is a pareidolia effect. And that's when people see patterns or inanimate objects or subliminal messages in something else. For example, when you see a dog shape in the clouds. And pareidolia is an example of a cognitive bias, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. So before I begin, let me very briefly tell you who I am. I am a UX researcher and designer at Fidelity Investments in the Dallas, Texas area. I also co-founded UX Research and Strategy, which we talked a little bit about earlier. Just one quick little plug. We have an event on October 15th about research methods. And Sherry, I don't know if you're recording this, but I'm just a reminder, if you were interested in recording it, you might want to.
Yes, I am.
Okay, cool. I couldn't tell. October 15th, again on Eventbrite, we're going to talk about what UX research method to use when. So for some of the people who are kind of newer to UX research, that might be an interesting topic to you. So again, UX research and strategy on Eventbrite. But enough about me. Let's get back to the talk. So first, let me say that I do not come from a psychology background. And I really think that's important to emphasize, because I don't want you to think that this is going to be some stuffy, highly academic talk. No way. I also want you to understand that people outside of psychology, like UX designers, product owners, developers, engineers, can benefit from knowing just a little bit about cognitive biases. Why? Because we all have them. What I hope for you to do today is to take away some ways to identify cognitive biases in yourself and in others. That really is the first step. Being aware of what a cognitive bias is can help them from creeping into your work. So today I want to talk about a few things. First, I'm going to give you a high-level definition of what cognitive bias means. Then I'm going to talk about what to look for yourself and in others to recognize what a cognitive bias looks like. Then I'm going to talk about what you can do to fight them off. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some ways that you can actually use cognitive biases to your advantages. Yes, you can even use them for good. So let's start with the basics. What is a cognitive bias? Well, according to Wikipedia, a cognitive bias is a systematic pattern of deviation from norm or rationality and judgment. What? Like I said before, it's a way that our brain plays tricks on us by jumping to conclusions about the world around us. It's mental shortcuts. We can't help it. The brain does this without us knowing. All right, so now that we know what it is, why do we care? I'm guessing we're not psychologists. I don't know, maybe some of you may have been in a previous life, but I'm guessing that most of the people on the Zoom tonight are people related to product or technology or UX in some way. And as a UX pro, or even a person creating some software or systems, we all know it's important to test our designs with users, right? In doing so, though, we must be careful not to bias our tests or to lead the witness. And when I say lead the witness, I mean asking questions in a biased way that might cause the person to answer based more on the way we ask the question rather than what their genuine answer is. So being aware of how we might do that, however unintentionally, is a key to a successful usability test or research study, or even when working with team members to solve a problem. If we can recognize a cognitive bias could be a problem and we're aware of the signs, then we can fight the urge to fall down that rabbit hole and help others to do the same. So now let's get started by looking at some types of biases that creep into our professional world. And we might as well start off with the most important person in the room, and that's you. We always think we're immune from the problems and flaws of others, don't we? Well, blind spot bias happens when we see ourselves as less biased than others. Also, we're displaying blind spot bias when we eagerly point out cognitive biases in others rather than ourselves. The key thing to know here is that everyone is affected by blind spot bias. Sure, people are motivated to view themselves in a positive light. It's natural, but we're no better than everyone else. So what does blind spot bias look like? Well, one sign is that you don't accept advice from others. I've seen this so many times. Someone's ego gets in the way of admitting we might not know something. Okay, so what can you do to prevent blind spot bias? Well, first, be aware it happens to everyone. Don't think of yourself as above the law. In the UX and the tech world, if you are conducting some sort of research, say a usability test, make sure you write your questions and your tasks out and have others review them. Share your questions and tasks with another pro or someone on your team, and make sure that you take their advice on improvements for removing maybe any leading questions. If you find yourself resisting their help, you might want to take another look at yourself, Mr. Blind Spot Bias. Okay, let's talk about another cognitive bias, which is known as the experimenter's bias. And this might apply a lot to people who are interested in research on tonight's call. First, let me clarify something when I talk about an experimenter. I'm not talking about some official researcher who is running a scientific experiment like what you see going on in this picture. I'm talking about anyone who is doing research with others to build empathy or to gain an understanding about a product or interviewing others for information. I would consider us all an experimenter. What happens with experimenter bias is that the person sharing their findings with others, often conducting some sort of research, they tend to believe and share information that agrees with their expectations. In other words, they promote and they talk about the things that went well with the research study, and then maybe forgets to mention the disagreeable stuff. So let me tell you a little story. I was participating in some research at a financial company, and we were sitting around tables, and each of us had a role. We had an interviewer, note takers, and the woman sitting at the head of the table was a car buying customer. And she was telling us about the last time that she went to a dealership to buy a car. So has anyone here, this is looking for a reaction here, has anyone here had a great experience with salespeople buying a car? If you have, give me a thumbs up in the reaction. Yeah, I'm not seeing a whole lot of thumbs up going on there. Yeah, the participant was talking about the car buying experience, which was less than fabulous. And okay, get this. And then the note taker on the team did not like what she was hearing the participant say. Instead of silently taking notes like she was supposed to be doing, she interrupted the participant and said, "What? I've never heard anything like that happening before. Are you sure that's what really happened?" Oh, I couldn't believe I just saw that. So, how can we avoid the experimenter's bias? Well, one way to avoid such biased behavior is to use people who are observers in the study that have little or no stake in the outcome of the experiment. If they're not emotionally involved, then they won't care if you kill their darlings. But if a person on your team who's involved in the research study does have some involvement, just make sure to have some clear rules and procedures in place for this research process. Remind the person that we're here to gather data and insights, not share our own thoughts. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper than the experimenter bias and talk about the observer-expectancy effect. So think about that person I just told you about who said, "Are you sure that's what really happened?" Think about how that behavior affected the participant for the rest of the interview. And I can assure you that it did. The observer-expectancy effect happened when a person who is talking, either subconsciously or unintentionally, reacts to the actions or what the participant says. And when this happens, the person who is the participant, their actions, like the person who's talking, conducting the interview, their actions influence the participant. And so it's kind of a reciprocal effect. And so what does this look like? Well, it can be surprise facial expressions when the participant gives a wrong answer. Or it can be making noises like scoffs or sighs, like things like that, if a participant does a wrong move in a usability test. Let me just say, this is bad, bad, bad. Please, if you're ever talking to users or stakeholders or partners on your team, and you're seeking honest feedback, want an open conversation, think about how the observer expectancy cognitive bias can affect that conversation. So let me tell you another story. We were talking about healthcare a little bit ago. So this story is about when I worked for that company that owns a lot of animal hospitals. I was asked, this was my first week on the job, and I was asked to sit on a focus group WebEx online phone call, phone call. And my product owner, we'll call him Dennis because that's his name, was revealing a new design. And this focus group phone call had 50, that's 50 people on the call with veterinarian doctors and technicians. So Dennis was revealing this new design, and he said to his innocent bystanders, "Here's the design of the new communication screen. Isn't it great? What do you guys think?" Oh, it kind of went black for me after that. Isn't this great? What do you guys think? Dennis just stepped in a huge pile of observer expectancy bias. Needless to say, this was the last time that format of a focus group was ever used on my watch at the company. As a UX designer, you want your design to succeed. I get it. You've poured your heart and your soul into your design. You've pushed every pixel into that perfect position. But when your design goes in front of a user and you see them struggling to do what seems like the simplest thing to do on the planet, what are you supposed to do? You want to freak out, but you can't. But here's some ways that you can try to avoid tainting the witness. Like I said before, if you can, get someone else to test your designs. Again, that other person is not emotionally invested, and therefore they're much less likely to react to feedback that's not in line with what the designer wants. The major point I want you to take away from the observer-expectancy effect is to keep your body language and your tone in check. You can even record yourself and see what kind of subconscious clues that you give off to people. And this will help you become more aware of your reactions that you might need to keep tame. Got a little fly. Anybody watch the debate last night? See the fly? Okay, back to the talk. So we've talked about how we can detect cognitive bias in ourselves. Now let's expand on that idea a bit and talk about cognitive biases and how they can affect how we perceive others compared to ourselves. Social comparison bias is the tendency to favor people who don't compete with our strengths. You've heard the phrase opposites attract, right? Well, there certainly is some truth to that. I, for one, cannot imagine being with someone who is as chatty and obnoxious as myself. Humans are constantly evaluating themselves and against others in a variety of ways. We are evaluating ourselves in things like attractiveness, wealth, intelligence, and success. We can't help it. Do you know something I do? Almost subconsciously. When I walk into a room of strangers, I look at a person's face and then I look at their left hand to see if they have a wedding band on. I do this for both men and women. I have no idea why. It's not like I'm on the prowl. I just almost instinctively look at a face and then a hand. This is my way of sizing someone up. And when it comes to the UX world, even professionals size each other up so they can try not to look bad. People worry that someone's going to bump their designs or ideas off that proverbial pedestal. This is why stakeholders tell you that they know what the user wants. This is why salespeople don't let you have access to customers so that you can chat with them yourself. And this is why some leaders and product owners don't want you to test your designs early and have those iterations on the product. They say, oh, we'll just get the feedback when it's released to the masses. So what can you do to prevent social comparison bias? Well, when we hire people for our team, we need to think about the diversity of the people on our team. Look for people from different races, religions, cultures, backgrounds, locations, to bring in that diverse perspective into our product. Think about what's happening in Silicon Valley and how they're not really providing a diverse perspective because they're all living in that tech bubble. By building out a diverse team, you're simply going to build better products. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the things that don't agree with our mental models or our ideas. I have another fancy word for you. Are you ready? It is the Semmelweis Effect. Can you say that? I'm not going to make you say that with me. I'm just going to say it twice. The Semmelweis Effect. And what that is that is the tendency to reject new evidence that contradicts the paradigm. The term originated from the story of Ignaz Semmelweis, who was a doctor, and he discovered, wait for this, that mortality and death rates fell 10 times when a doctor washed their hands in between patients, and most particularly after performing an autopsy and then going on to a patient. Pretty shocking, huh? Sure, washing your hands seems like a no-brainer now, but Semmelweis's hand washing suggestions was rejected by his peers. I guess that every new process has to start at some time. So how does this cognitive bias relate to the non-medical world? Well, as we've seen in previous examples, people already think that they know best. It's hard to convince them that they're wrong. Old paradigms are stubborn and difficult to break. For some on this call, this may have been the way that you checked email or got on the internet to do work. And for those who don't know, this is an old Apple computer, ancient. Then Steve Jobs came along and decided that we all needed a way to access this stuff on our phone. Yeah, our phone. But this concept had been tried before and failed. This is a picture of a Palm Pilot, which is an early personal digital assistant. In fact, others were created way before the iPhone, but they weren't as, as successful. Why? Well, perhaps people in the world were just not ready for it yet. Or let me say some people were not ready for it. And that's where the Semmelweis effect kicks in. People are creatures of habit, and we don't like change. But in order for things to become modern and new, we have to challenge the status quo. We have to be accepting of innovation opportunities. So I want you to think about what might be your Semmelweis hand-washing moment. Okay, so have you ever had someone come up with a problem to solve and you wondered how the competition was tackling that same problem? Pretty natural to wonder how other companies are solving the same issues, right? Has anybody ever, give me a thumbs up if you've ever kind of wondered, okay, let me do a little looking around to see who else is dealing with this. Yeah. Well, not everybody thinks that way. And this is what the not invented here cognitive bias kicks in. And this is where people don't want to accept information or ideas that come from outside of their group. It's the classic, oh, we don't need to know what that group is doing because it's probably not as good as our idea. I've seen this at companies that I've worked at, and it's really frustrating for me. As a researcher and a designer, one of my first reactions in hearing about a new problem to solve is to figure out what already exists in the world. Why reinvent the wheel? When you look at what the competitor is doing, this is known as a competitive analysis or competitive benchmarking. Hopefully some of you have heard of that term. We look at other products to see what they're doing better. And are there any good features that we might want to steal for our own stuff? Or we look at what they suck at and make sure that we don't put those things in our products. So think for a second. I'm sure some of you have been here where you've had a stakeholder that said, oh, we don't need to check out the competition. Well, if you ever hear that, that person is suffering from the non-invented here cognitive bias. So why does this happen? Well, I think there's a number of things that can contribute to the non-invented here bias, but basically it's this whole idea, for me, in my opinion, it stems from insecurity. So when I'm first assigned to a new idea, I love to see, like I said, what people are doing, basically so that I can see what features somebody else has done, and I might want to borrow those and put those into mine. And it's also a great way for you to avoid the not invented here bias, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So it's pretty common knowledge that people are social beings. Even the introverts on this call, and I know that some of you are on here because I haven't seen your video, and that's okay. There are introverts and everyone is welcome, but even introverts seek social interaction from time to time. So this next cognitive bias I'm going to talk about is going to focus on some of the things we do as humans to fit in with the group. So have you ever bit your tongue? And no, I don't mean when you're eating food. I mean when you wanted to say something in a group setting, but you were afraid your opinion was too different than that of the rest of the group. Yeah, anybody? Thumbs up? Yeah. Courtesy bias is not fully stating your opinion once an opinion has already been rolled out from somebody in the group, even if you don't agree. We don't say anything because we don't want to offend others or we don't want to look bad in front of the group. I get it. It makes sense that you might want to speak your true thoughts in front of others. You don't want to be embarrassed by saying the wrong thing. Like it or not, we're social beings and we want to fit in. We do this sometimes, keeping our mouth shut until we feel safe to speak. So how do we exhibit this courtesy bias? Simply put, we wait for someone else to speak first before we say anything. Ever been on one of those group meetings where somebody doesn't speak after the presenter asks a question? Sure. Everyone kind of sits there and waits in this awkward silence? Well, sure. One of the reasons why you may not have an answer is because you don't know the answer, but a lot of times it's because people are afraid to express themselves first. And they don't want to look foolish and say the wrong thing. So I have a great way to combat courtesy bias in a brainstorming session. And by that I mean you have a group of people. We used to stand around a whiteboard, but now it might be a virtual whiteboard, and each person is contributing sticky notes or ideas to the brainstorming session. And I think this process that I'm going to go through helps those introverts who don't feel comfortable speaking out in a group setting. First, when you're having a group brainstorming session, you need to create a comfortable environment for contradictions. Lay down some ground rules like all ideas are welcome. We're not shooting anything down at this point. It's brainstorming, right? Quantity over quality. No analysis yet. Those types of rules. And then after you lay down the rules, you go through this simple process. You have everyone write ideas down first in silence. Then you have everyone put those ideas on the board in silence. And once everybody's ideas are on the board, that's when you can start to discuss things as a group. By giving the group the opportunity to generate ideas in silence, you're giving all people a chance to write their true thoughts. They're not distracted by what others are saying. The benefit of coming up with ideas in silence is that it levels the playing field. You give the people who don't normally feel comfortable talking in a group the opportunity to get their thoughts out. And they can do this before any of the chatty people start talking. And I can point at myself as guilty as being one of those chatty people. So I get it. I feel like this generating ideas in silence is a very important step for any idea generating session. And it's also a great way to avoid the courtesy bias among the group, right? So now let's move on and talk about how our perceptions have been influenced by things that we have seen very recently, as opposed to those things from a long time ago. The first one I'd like to talk about is the Baader-Meinhof effect. That's a big word, so I'm going to say it twice. The Baader-Meinhof effect. And this is also known as the frequency illusion. And this is a cognitive bias that happens when something that has recently come into our attention suddenly seems like it appears everywhere. So have you ever seen a famous person in the news and then it feels like their name is all over the place? They're on Insta and TikTok and your newsfeed and their Facebook, they're everywhere. Or recently I heard somebody say, oh, global warming is definitely a thing because every day in October has been hotter than the next. Well, to be honest, we're not even done with the month yet. So that's a little bit of premature call. So why does this happen? Well, remember, the brain has to make sense of things quickly. It can't help it. So some of you here probably see 3 circles. But these circles are also made up of these like little leafy things. Our mind loves to make patterns for us. And the brain seeks things it's comfortable with and latches onto those. And thus, it ignores the other things that it's not as familiar with. So when a pattern or a name of a person rings true to us, our brain latches onto that. And as a result, we tend to think we see or hear that item more than we actually do. So here's a real world example. It's getting to be fall, it's October, and so you're thinking about buying a green sweater. Now you suddenly see lots of people wearing green sweaters. or do you? So when somebody makes a claim, this happens all the time, or all of our users are doing this, maybe you need to take that claim with a grain of salt. My main point about the Baader-Meinhof effect is recognizing that trends might not actually be as frequent as the person is stating. It might be more in their mind. All right, so have you ever seen a person ride a scary ride, screaming their head off the entire time in sheer terror? But then when they get off the ride, they're overjoyed, they're pumped and ecstatic and ready to hop on that ride again. Has anybody seen this? Give me a thumbs up if you've ever seen somebody who screamed their head off the entire time and then they get off the ride and they're totally ready to ride it again. Yeah. Well, this is known as the peak end rule. And people judge an experience largely based on how they felt at the peak or the end of an experience. So in the case of this ride, the person is probably feeling relief of the ride being over and they survived rather than the sheer 2 minutes of terror that they had just been through. So let me illustrate the peak end rule with another story. My husband and I were in a restaurant where the menu was on an iPad or a tablet. They didn't have printed menus. And I was watching him order a meal on that iPad in this restaurant for some research I was doing on a product. He has a gluten-free diet, so he needs to order special things that are gluten-free, like gluten-free hamburger bun and pizza crust, and make sure the dietary ingredients are gluten-free. I watched him struggle through the menu on that tablet. He was clicking all over the place, hunting, pecking, searching. He griped, he complained, he huffed. It was actually kind of fun to watch. But eventually he found the gluten-free bun for his hamburger. French fries were safe and gluten-free, and he placed his order. After ordering, he said, "That was easy enough." He'd already forgotten all the pain he had just been through. For him, the peak of the experience was finishing the task and being done. That was positive for him, and therefore the whole experience was positive. So as we learn about the peak end rule, I want to take an opportunity to plug the importance of one of my favorite types of research, and this is ethnographic observation, also known as side-by-sides. And ethnographic observation is when you're with the person and you observe what they're doing. Maybe you sit by them while they're working at their desk and see how they work. See how they interact with their environment and how people come over and interrupt them and what kind of cheat sheets they have. Or like these photos here, I was on Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles where I was doing some research for a product. I was observing and talking to tourists to learn about how they research tourist attractions in the area. The point here is that you're watching them go through the activity and picking up on those clues that you would only see in person. They're likely to report things differently after the fact than what really happened. They might not tell you about their struggles, but if you're there, you can see them firsthand. Like the story about my husband ordering gluten-free food. You can't always take a person by what they say, but you can by what that person does. So I know a lot of today's talk has been focusing on the negative aspects of cognitive biases, and that's because they're pretty bad. And I want everyone here to be aware of these important fallacies so you can be better researchers and designers and product partners. But you can use the traits of cognitive bias in a good way as well. Note that positive is key here. We're not going to make any dark patterns, right, folks? Well, remember how I talked about the Baader-Meinhof effect or the frequency illusion earlier? Again, that's the cognitive bias that happens when something that has recently come into our attention suddenly seems to appear everywhere. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can see that you can use that comfort and familiarity to guide a user through a journey more smoothly. And you can repeat elements, like especially in an omni-channel experience. An omni-channel is where a person might interact with your product across multiple touch points. Let's say they start looking at their account, they start shopping at home or on their work computer. And then they go into the store and start shopping around in the store. And then maybe they pull out their phone and look at the app or the website to do additional research. This would be an example of an omni-channel experience where they're coming into contact with your product on multiple places. And as someone who's creating and designing products, you can use familiar clues like colors, fonts, logos, and common design patterns to make that user feel comfortable with where they are. And this makes them feel more comfortable with the experience when it is consistent. So has anyone here ever assembled a piece of furniture they bought from IKEA? Give me a thumbs up. Building stuff at IKEA. How did it make you feel? Frustrated? Accomplished? Satisfied? I know that I feel like a champion when I put something together from IKEA. I have to admit though, I've had some furniture that was a little less than perfect, like this. This is not my bad example, but I've had some doozies, let me tell you. Whether you love it or hate it, there's a cognitive bias associated with the famous blue and yellow Swedish box store, IKEA. The IKEA effect is the tendency for people to place high value on objects that they have partially assembled themselves, just like furniture from IKEA, even if the quality or the end result is not perfect. So why is this a thing? Well, people have an emotional investment when they build something from their own blood, sweat, and tears. Okay, so how does the IKEA effect apply to products and app design and UX design? Well, a user can experience that same effect when they accomplish a task, like assembling a puzzle or getting some work done, completing a task. They feel a stronger emotional connection when they complete it successfully. So consider this feeling when you build an interface or some kind of product that perhaps you could give the user a taste of delight after their own success. So hopefully you maybe have found a couple things I talked about tonight a little bit funny. Give me a break, okay? I tried. I tried to inject a little bit of humor along the way. And I've done that because I know that humorous items are more easily remembered than non-humorous ones. And this is known as the humor effect. So this is an easy one, right? We've all seen something funny on the internet. I actually like this 404, this error page. It's light fun. You get to choose the developer that gets fired for this error message coming up. Hit the thumbs up if you find this page funny like I do. There goes my dog go up the stairs again. Anybody else find this funny? I don't know, maybe this is my own warped sense of humor. Innocent fun, right? So when a company shows something funny, it allows users to connect with your company or your product on a more personal and emotional level. Humor feels conversational or relatable, and it gives your company or site a more human connection. So how can you inject humor into something that you're designing? Well, first you want to decide how you're going to do it. Is it going to be through words or illustration or animation? But I do have a caveat about humor. And you need to make sure that it's appropriate for your audience and represents the message that your company wants to send. Do not be inappropriate. Remember, we're using these cognitive biases for good, right? So let's move on to another example of a cognitive bias that could be used to benefit your designs. Just take a minute to let this image kind of sink in. There's a lot going on here. I can't even with this image. Hit the thumbs up if you also find this page pretty bizarre. Right. in a world where in a world where everyone seems to try to one up the next guy, people have to get more creative and sometimes extreme to capture your limited attention. What that means is bizarre material is better remembered than common material. Thus, the bizarreness effect comes in. This is part of the reason why humans and animals have peripheral vision. We notice things that move. And in many cases, we notice things that are different. Okay, so this seems like a pretty easy cognitive bias, right? You just make everything shocking, huh? Well, not really. The whole point here is that you want your website or product, whatever you're working on, to stand out in a sea of sameness. But you also don't want to be obnoxious and annoying. Again, you can use design elements like color, contrast, emphasis to make something stand out. This is why you see buttons on a page that look different from everything else. You can also use animation to draw attention to something. And finally, like I mentioned before, you can use humor, like a fun illustration, to play at that bizarreness effect. The key is to balance pleasantly surprised and obnoxious as heck. And finally, I'm going to wrap up the ways that you can use cognitive biases for good with a very important one that we often take for granted. And if you do nothing else in the universe as a designer or a person involved in making stuff, please do this one thing. Make good defaults. Like this nice and tidy room here. When a person comes to your product for the first time, have things set up for them nicely. The default effect happens when we're given a set of options. We assume the default options are the best one. We expect good things to already be chosen for us so that we don't have to do anything to set them. Say, for example, when you install an app on your phone, you might assume that push notifications are turned off automatically. If not, you find out the hard way that they're actually turned on as by default as soon as you're bombarded with useless notifications. I've been there. Give me a thumbs up if you've also been there where a default was not set up for you and you found it very frustrating. For example, notifications turned on. Yeah, it's really frustrating. So as a user, the user assumes that the expert, or at the very least the creator of the app, has vetted out the best design decisions for you. And that is what is automatically set in motion as soon as you sign up. When given a choice between several options, we have a tendency to favor the default one. Humans are lazy. Tell us what the best selection is. Like the famous words of Steve Krug, the author, "Don't make me think." So how do you design a product or experience to promote good defaults? Well, part of it is to keep the marketing and the sales department out of the designing a feature business. Let's be honest, sometimes some marketing people want to plug in features into an app for a different agenda than what the user wants. But don't let them throw in a bunch of features that are not what the users really want and need. These kind of things contribute to feature bloat. Okay, but really, what's a practical way you can design good defaults is to conduct user research and understand how that person normally uses that product. And then you align the defaults to that. So how is this done in design? Well, you can use color and fonts and group like items together to emphasize the best option, like you see here. Packaging options in a visual way will give that user confidence that you are presenting the right choice to them. That is, of course, if you are presenting the best option to them. Remember, do good with our designs, right? Okay, to conclude, I want to revisit a few of the major points we talked about today. We talked about how biases affect everyone, like the blind spot bias, and how we need to be careful when we're acting as a researcher not to lead the witness. We talked about the need to avoid things like the Semmelweis effect and be open to different and outside ideas. We also discussed our human need to fit in with the group, with the cognitive bias like the courtesy bias. We also talked about how our memory can be skewed and we think something we've seen recently, like in the Baader-Meinhof effect, makes us think we're seeing something all the time. And then finally, we talked about some ways to turn that frown upside down and use cognitive biases for good. Now, the things I talked about tonight are just the tip of the iceberg of how many cognitive biases are out there. There are a bunch. But I think we hit on some major ones that you can take away with you today. My main point is for you to be aware that they exist. You look for the signs of them in yourself, and more fun, look for the signs of them in others, and hopefully keep them out of your future designs and research and discussions. I want you to go out there and build better products without bias. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. That was amazing. I think you changed up some things in it, haven't you, since I saw it last?
Maybe.
Okay.
I like to keep things
Just a
different.
few things. But yeah, it's so great. I learned something new again. So this is one of the reasons I asked you to do this, and thanks so much. And you're such a nerd. I love it. So you made me laugh. So yeah, anybody have any questions? Well, we have her. We have a few minutes till 8 o'clock to take questions. Ask away.
Or comments. We can have a discussion around things too.
How do you go, like, this is a very interesting list, and it's awesome the way you presented it because it's very, very, you know, succinct and to the point. How, for those who do research, because like for me, research is not to the level that you guys do it. How do you wind up, you know, all right, I'm going to do something on feature X or whatever product. Like, how do you do, like, what are you checking a box? Do you have a checklist that you prepare against?
Fess, is your question, how do you know what to research, or what's your question?
No, like, let's say you're going to do, there's one portion of a product that you need to do something, and like, how do you have a checklist that you go with? Like, all right, I need to figure out that bias is not going to show up in here. How do you tackle bias?
Okay, that's okay. Yeah. I'm with you.
Yep.
I do not have a checklist. I do have somebody else review it and say, just make sure, like, say, for example, if it's, you want somebody to find something on your site, you're doing some kind of findability, right? Can they find this item? Make sure you don't have the word. So for an example, you want to give a donation. Well, you want to make sure your navigation doesn't say donate, right? I'm leading the witness by telling them what to look for. So just some of those little things. I don't have a checklist that shows cognitive bias and make sure that this isn't, you know, make sure that X cognitive bias is not part of this, because so much of it is on the fly and mostly in conversations and the way that people act. So not so much about, like, you know, so for the example, like courtesy bias, that's not a bias I need to worry about so much in a usability test, because I kind of know that they're going to maybe hesitate to speak, but, you know, that's just kind of, it comes out like naturally. But no, I don't have a checklist to make sure that there's not, like, make sure that this cognitive bias is not present. Is that your question?
They're very contextual.
Got
Right.
it. Yeah, I absolutely understood that. It's just like, you know, like, how do you wind up, you know, prepping and kind of doing a bunch of stuff?
Well, for me, my recommendation is to write your discussion guide out, write your research plan, and have somebody else review it and have another set of eyes look at it, and just to make sure, like, hey, even say, hey, I don't want to be biasing them in any way. I don't want to lead the witness in any way. Can you read these questions with that context in mind?
Awesome. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat from Jamila. You want to ask your question?
Jamila.
Sure. For the I believe it was the Baader frequency effect. I was wondering, what are your recommendations on how to best combat that?
Well, a lot of people don't even, I mean, like good question, Jamila. A lot of people don't even realize that they're guilty of it. It's funny now that I'm more familiar with this cognitive bias. I see my husband doing it all the time. I'm like, oh, you're such a sucker. So again, just kind of having people aware, or just being aware of that you might not be seeing things as frequently. You know, like I mentioned, oh, everybody uses this. Well, ask for the data. How do we know that everybody uses this? It's kind of getting those assumptions out on the table. Like, okay, that's great. We think that a lot of people use this. Let's test this to make sure, and not just take that at face value that, oh, all of our users do it this way, or, oh, we already know this. It's kind of just, you know, talking about those assumptions, getting them all out, and making sure that, okay, that's what we think we are right now. Let's test for that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So has anybody, can they think of a scenario where they've seen this one of these cognitive biases in work, or something they've done? Anybody seen anything like this that they want to share? No one's seen any cognitive bias? Come on. How about the non-invented here bias? Have you ever had somebody say, no, we don't, we know we have this, we've got this right, we don't need to research this any further or see what else anybody has done? Has anybody ever seen that?
All the time I see people, including myself, you know, you can't help it sometimes. You're so in the mode of the flow of the interview, and next thing you know, either you or you're observing someone else, and it's like, oh, that's great, you know, and when people see that little spark of excitement, they think, oh, I'm giving them the right answer. I'm going to keep going in that direction. And it's hard to stay neutral and to not compliment when people give the right answer, that kind of thing, you know, like reward almost.
Yeah, that's a good point, Denise. Back to that observer-expectancy effect, right? When you are interviewing somebody, you do have to be careful to remain neutral and not be over-enthusiastic and say, oh, that's a great answer. Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Because they'll elevate to match your excitement. And you don't want that to happen. And I think that's what you're talking about, right, Denise?
Yep.
Yeah, so you have to be like, thanks, that's great. I mean, you know, but great in a, oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have to say, that's very helpful, thanks. And then that's it. And because you can influence them, because people have a tendency to people please.
Exactly.
And do what they think is right. And I keep saying there's no right or wrong answer. This is just your opinion, your first glance, and, you know, I have nothing to do with it, kind of thing. Try to make it as unbiased as possible. So,
right.
Like for me, it's confirmation bias. Like,
yeah,
constantly shows up, especially when it comes to software design. So, like, because I've done a bunch of studies in which I'm the subject, in which they're contacting me to do. I'm like, okay, we have a feature we'd like to test, and they're always like, they're like looking to confirm something, and I'm always going outside the box and breaking what they're doing. So they're like, why did you do that? I'm like, because I didn't expect it to be here.
Exactly, Fess. And that's kind of one of those, that's a great cognitive bias to, you know, have somebody else read your script to make sure that you're, you know, not directing somebody or going with that confirmation bias, right? Stepping back and being more neutral in your questions rather than directing them to an opinion or to a position.
Yeah, goes back to you talking about the donate button.
I've seen that. I was at a company and they were like, they just want a little consulting. I was like, oh my gosh, your task is you want to donate money and you have donation in the navigation. Yes, they know where to go. Super simple. And people do look for words really quickly. So especially in findability, or if you know, you're testing your information architecture, instead of saying you want to donate money, you say you want to give money, because people will cling on to donation and look for the word donation. Oh, kind of similar to the Baader-Meinhof effect, right? Like, oh, I've got a word to look for. Now I'm going to go hunt for it. And so making sure that those kind of leading terms are also left out of your task.
Also why UX writers are important.
Yes,
Yep. Thank you.
writers.
It's a weird thing that a lot of places don't have them.
Yeah.
Which is also kind of really weird.
And you have, a lot of times you have designers writing the copy just because, oh, we need to have something in there to test, and then it doesn't get edited and changed later. And you have a designer who has an agenda, and, you know, they might be using terminology that's not familiar to the users, or, you know.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. That was basically what happened in my last position. It's like we had a bunch of designers, a single researcher, no writers. So they're writing their own copy. And so there's confirmation bias, like a lot of recency bias occurring as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the number one thing that Jen is trying to get across is just being aware of these is a step ahead of everyone else, because if you're not aware of it, you're going to be doing it all the time. But as researchers and designers and those who are involved with testing others or you know, making things for others, you need to be aware of those biases, and it makes you just that much more sharp and a little bit more skilled in what you're doing.
Yeah. And if you're ever given the opportunity to, and I've been asked, do you want to watch this in person or do you want to ask them after the fact? Always go with watch them in person if you can. Because I can recall when I worked for the veterinary hospital, I had a dentist, or a doctor trying to find a dental procedure in the computer so that he could add that to the bill. And he was doing it over and over. He was typing in his terms. He couldn't find it, so he'd start again. And I saw him redo this 4 times. And I was like, what's going on? You know, trying to be like dumb, but I could see he's struggling. He was like, nothing. What do you mean? I go, oh, you're typing. And he's like, yeah, I'm just putting in a dental. What he didn't communicate to me, but what I saw was he was putting in this procedure. He had to search 4 times to find the right term, but he never told me that. But I saw him do it. So those are the little stumbles. I don't think it wasn't like he was embarrassed and he didn't want to tell me. I don't think he was even aware that he was doing it over and over again. So seeing those little clues, you know, I went right back to my product owner and I was like, he struggled to find this item in our catalog. We need to make sure these terms are easier to find so that they don't have to do it 4 times.
And I was able to observe someone doing something, and I pointed out, well, wouldn't it be better, because just to give you a quick example of this, there was just think of a list, 600 rows down, and she was taking something from the top row and click and dragging it all the way down to the bottom, to the, you know, bottom hundreds or whatever, and then taking one from the bottom and putting it to the top. And I said, what are you doing? She said, I just need to swap these because I'm trying to even these out, and this one's 15 seconds, that was 30 seconds. And I'm like, well, would it be easier just to click both of them and do swap? And she's like, that would be awesome. So I went back to the development team and said, is this possible? And they're like, oh yeah, for sure. So they built it, they put it in there, and then we tracked it, and it became used 40% of the time over every other way to move these places that were moved around. So we know that that was a huge thing, and they weren't telling me this. They weren't saying, I need help with this. I just happened to observe it. So yeah, observing is so helpful.
What I find interesting about that is, I think it's because people get used to doing something so many times. It doesn't seem like an issue to them. It's just their work. That is what they do.
Right.
And so it doesn't seem as something that's a complaint to them. And then when you point them out, they're like, huh, this is a little weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
I have to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, we do that too. And we're not even, we're doing it right now, maybe not sitting here, but we're doing it presently. And we don't even know that we're doing it too. It's everybody does that. Everybody has their hacks, right? Look at your desk. Do you have any Post-it notes on your monitor or your computer with a shortcut or something you need to easily remember? Thumbs up. I've got 2 right here on my monitor right now. That's a hack. That's a problem that I shouldn't have, but we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. Any other questions?
You can
Yeah.
hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. Well, I'm not very big on Instagram, but Twitter, LinkedIn. Join the, connect to the group on LinkedIn, UX Research and Strategy, and hopefully we will see you at some of those events too. But yeah, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn and continue the conversation if you're up for it as well.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, I think let's see my screen. Okay, we'll jump in where we left off here. And so I just have one announcement, and that is we have Google Forms that I want to, yes, thank you so much, that I want to share with you. And this is a form you can fill out to give suggestions about topics that you want to learn about from our group. And we, as you can tell, we really work with other groups as well, with Jen's group, and we also work with San Diego UX, and I think that Boulder, Colorado, I'm on there too. So we're connecting with different groups and trying to bring new speakers and activities for you. So if there's something that you think of that you've heard somewhere else or want to bring here, fill that form out. Or if you want to give us a talk, we're welcome to that too. Some people just need some practice and to work that out, but we can certainly do that. We're scheduling for next year. Right now we have schedules through February so far. So Orlando, yeah, I think I've been to a few of those. So just put that information in there. It'd be great for us to connect. And now that we're all connecting together through the internet, there's no reason to have boundaries for who can come and who can't. So I want to invite you to do that. So the next thing is door prizes. Jen, are you still there?
I am.
Okay. Can I get you to give me a number? We have 13, we'll see, besides me and you, there's 12 people left. So can you give me a number between 1 and 12?
4.
4. Okay. Denise iPhone. You won a door prize. All right. So what you won is either a $25 gift card to Amazon or a $25 gift card to Rosenfeld Media, who is a publisher of UX books. So just let me know, send me a private message with your email of where and which one you want, and we'll get that sent out to you this week. Congratulations.
Cool.
Right. And as Jim was speaking earlier, World Usability Day is, we're partnering with them for next month. And the information that's on our page is actually a link to their sign up page. I believe it's is it an Eventbrite LinkedIn link or something like that?
It is.
Okay, that you have to sign up for that. And if you can make that, please go. It's free. It's really, really nice for y'all to be putting that together. It's really hard in this virtual times. And we've done it a couple of times in the last 2 years in person, and it's a big feat to pull off. So please go and join that. You'll learn something, I promise. And then our closing, this is where Mackenzie, if you're there, if you can give us kind of a quick introduction and give us a review of how the job market's doing. Do you want to share your screen, or do you just want to unmute?
There we go. Yep, double unmuted.
Okay.
I so appreciate you guys having me out. I definitely have said over and over during these times, like I really miss this part of my job where I get to meet everybody in person, and that was such a big part of my job before quarantine. So good to connect in any way we can. But yeah, I support the Austin market primarily, and then now since all of these changes, pretty much nationally, any digital market you would think of. So we've been seeing so many changes, and luckily I think the silver lining is there's a lot of remote work, a lot of teams being built out in design. The user is at the center for so many of our initiatives. I think a lot of my neighboring divisions are jealous of us. So we've got a lot of design business coming, which is a great silver lining. So I'm just going to send this in the chat so you guys have this to reference. And then I'm sure I'll probably get connected in Slack. But we've got a lot going on in Austin as well as remote. And those are the list right now. So I'd say there's probably 50 plus active roles in Austin. And there's a variety. So we're hiring at all levels, entry, mid-level, senior, director levels, architects, principal, I mean, everything, usability, accessibility. It's very diverse. So everything's in Fortune 500 and either enterprise or a large studio. And so if you're wanting to join, I guess like an established design environment or make a change, or you want a remote role, definitely reach out, or let's, keep our friends in mind too. Being that everybody is so connected and aware of, the layoffs and things like that, definitely feel free to refer anyone that's in need of a role. There's plenty out there right now. And we've seen this kind of come back to life in the last month or so. So this will continue into Q1. Some big hiring initiatives between Dell, GM, USAA, Tesla, Apple, some really large enterprises in Austin, and then across the nation that just, you can imagine all the other companies in every other market doing the same. So big focus on design, a big focus on research. So I'm really excited for that, and I'm glad that it's impacting our industry positively. So feel free to reach out. I'll send my email in here as well and connect with, I'm pretty sure I've connected with everybody on LinkedIn by now. So I appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for that. And are you seeing an uptick in hiring for, like you said, research and design?
Yes, definitely an uptick. I'd say our pause, our kind of our halt cleared out maybe June, and we started back up in July, seeing a lot of these teams get budget again. So majority of this is remote, so definitely gear up for remote roles, being on remote teams, working for a different time zone, or maybe having lower rate. We are definitely combating that, but there is ample opportunity to get exposed to some other industries and other companies that may not be in your town or in your city. So yep, we'll have a lot during November, December, January.
Well, great. Thank you so much. And yeah, and we'll get that information out, to your information out to them to reach out to as well. So thank you, Jen. Thank you so much for your time, and learned something every time I hear you talk. And she has lots of different talks. If y'all hear that she's talking somewhere else, please go. She spreads the love, and we really appreciate it. So
thank you for having me. This has been great.
Oh yeah,
so thankful.
Oh yes, thanks so much. All right, well, everybody have a great night, and enjoy the rest of your night, and we will see you next time.
Night, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Sherry. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.